We have a list of things that are coming up. There are a few conflicts. We're going to try to resolve those by next week, and hopefully we'll have a clean schedule for by next week that will let people know what's coming up. I'm going to do a really brief, you already have this piece in front of you, but Dave Toplikar is our speaker. He's a reporter, a journalist, and somehow or another got involved in UFOs. That's got to be an interesting story. Are you ready? I'm ready. Good enough. Welcome, Dave.
Let's just, can you hear me?
Yep, speak right in. Speak right into that.
Pointed at you.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. For starters, I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. I know it's kind of rainy, but still, you know, it's great to have so many interesting people. And it's an honor to speak at the very first one of these for the semester. I'm sure that you'll probably get a few more students later on when they learn about it. But anyway, let's get started. I may just take this off.
No, it's a good idea.
Speak right into it.
There we go. That's
Yep.
good.
That helps.
Okay, thanks to Nobu for setting this up and inviting me out here.
Can you speak a little louder?
And thank you. Is that better?
That's
Yeah,
better.
that's better.
It points at your mouth. Pointed at your mouth.
There. How's that? Okay, well, I'll learn this as I go. As you know, I'm a former, well, I am a journalist. I'm still writing books, but I used to work for a newspaper in Lawrence, Lawrence Journal World, and I also worked for the Las Vegas Sun. And I got interested in UFOs when people would come to our office and ask us if anybody had seen anything. So I began in my spare time just kind of looking things up. And what I did was create this book last year and just had it published this year. So here you go. Book's title, UFO Cold Cases, Kansas, Secret U.S. Air Force Files from 1947 to 1961. And these are all declassified. They were once secret. At one time, UFOs were serious business. The Air Force was investigating them. We didn't know what they were. Missiles, could it be Russian? Could it be ours? Could it be from somewhere from outer space? They were interested in protecting the United States and in protecting the environment. Then all of a sudden, the Air Force quit investigating. Why? What changed? What did they find out? This has been a mystery now for probably since 1969 when Project Blue Book was ended. However, people are still seeing.
Sorry.
Okay. People are still seeing UFOs, and of course, people are worried about them. What I and other people want to know is, what does the government know? What are they hiding from us? What is the truth? So what I did is I went back to the beginning, back to 1947, back to when the first UFOs were sighted. Flying saucers, as they called them then, were being seen around the country. The Air Force was pretty worried about it. Some of them were wondering, are they a threat? Could it be Russian? Can we capture one? Can we get their technology? Others are wondering, are they something else? Are they something from out of the world? Are they extraterrestrial? The United States Air Force began taking action. They began an informal Project Saucer, which began documenting these sightings. They looked at 107 sightings in 1947. Later on, Project Saucer was made formal and became Project Sign, late in 1947. Then Project Sign morphed into what was called Project Grudge, which was more of a debunking project. That began in 1949. However, because of a rash of new sightings in 1952, the Pentagon began Project Blue Book. And for the next 20 years, they cataloged and investigated 12,618 cases. Most of them, they had their analysts explain them away. However, there were 701 cases that were marked unknown. That's 701 cases without an answer. So I decided I would look into what Project Blue Book had done. This is a statement that the Air Force put out in 1995 when people were asking him, why did you stop Project Blue Book? People are still seeing all these. And they basically said, there's no money to look into it. But what I've discovered was these cases are real-life X-Files. They're declassified, and they're now available online thanks to the internet. What I've also discovered when I was doing my research is that many of these unknowns were reported by military pilots and prominent citizens. Dozens of these one secret cases were, believe it or not, in Kansas. The challenges that I had when I was looking these up was these documents are often incomplete. If you've ever looked at government documents, you know what I'm talking about. They're redacted, they're missing names, often difficult to read. They need historical context to make any sense out of them, and they need some kind of analysis. So many cases that seem to call out for more investigation were seemingly just put into the unknown bin and dropped. And I was wondering why. Were the investigators incompetent? I don't really think so. I think the government may be knowing more than they're telling us. So I created this book. It's available now on Amazon.com. And I'll go through a little bit of the chapters. The book includes some of these 701 unknown cases as they apply to Kansas, and also some of the more classic UFO sightings. Chapter 1 deals with a sighting over Clay Center, Kansas. It's about 100 miles from Kansas City. That's a map of Kansas if you can't read maps. And the chapter is titled Link to Roswell. And the reason I did that was because on July 6, 1947, when this was seen, there was a guy who was flying, a military pilot, who was flying a B-25 over Clay Center. He saw a disc-shaped object, and it was about 30 to 50 feet in diameter. And first it was under him, and then it was over him. And he reported it. But the analyst in Project Blue Book thought that it probably was a solar reflection. However, they still marked it as an unknown. What was interesting to me about this sighting was that it was only a few days after the alleged Roswell crash in New Mexico. And I'm sure all of you have probably heard about Roswell. You know that it was one of the very first sightings of the very first crashes that was reported. The picture there that you see is of Jesse Marcel and an Army general looking over what they claimed to be was the crash debris, but it was actually just leftovers from an old balloon that they had trotted out for the press. We found out about that probably 30 years later. Also on July 6th, there were 3 more UFO instances, 2 in California and 1 in Birmingham, Alabama. In fact, 12 were already spotted that week. So it makes you wonder, was there an invasion? Fast forward ahead 2 years, February 18, 1948. There's a giant explosion in the sky over Norcator, Kansas. This was like covered in the press. People came, flocked from miles around to figure out what it was. People didn't know. There was a lot of smoke in the sky. They didn't know if it was a secret aircraft, a missile, Russian aircraft, flying saucer, or a meteor. The smoke cloud lingered for several minutes. Then, strangely, a small battery fell out of the sky onto the street, and a sheriff recovered it. People gathered around. The battery went missing for a while. The sheriff finally got it back. I don't know where the battery is now, but anyway. Anyway, this is, if you can imagine this being in the afternoon in a small town, everybody came outside and we're talking and looking up in the sky and seeing this large thing. Finally, a state highway official who must have lived there came out that night and started taking statements. And one of the statements I found to be interesting. You probably can't read that, but this is from a farmer who reported that a 4-foot funnel-shaped craft was hovering near him. He was like over in like 14 miles away. He said it came down to his farm and kind of hovered over his house. Then all of a sudden it leapt in a trail of smoke, and strangely about 40 seconds later there's this big explosion over Norcator. So he thought it had something to do with that. Unfortunately, the farmer's sighting was ignored. The Air Force said they just decided that they were just going to write it off as a meteor. Said it was a bolide, and I'm sure our professor of astronomy in the back probably could explain what that is more than I can, but from my understanding, it's just an exploding meteor. However, the strange thing was that there was no debris found except for that battery. And then the only debris found was probably several months later in Nebraska. So we're kind of wondering if that was a cover-up.
What was found in Nebraska?
They found I think they found finally found like 1,000-pound rock in a field.
Oh.
And they actually auctioned it off. I think New Mexico got part of it, and I think Nebraska got part of it. Then my book goes on to record 3 sightings that were recorded on January 6, 1950. Actually, 2 sightings. One was down in the southeastern town of Howard, Kansas, and this was actually seen by 3 pilots who were flying from Oklahoma up to Nebraska. They were going. I guess what they did is they saw this giant thing that looked like just a big silver object, and they estimated its speed at about 500 miles an hour going underneath them. They got back to Nebraska and they reported it, but nobody had a clue as to what it was. And these were respected pilots, and they'd never seen anything like it. Then that same day, that evening, 2 men who were at the Bendix plant in Kansas City, Missouri, had just gotten off work about 7:30 at night, went outside, looked up in the sky, and saw one of these crazy flying saucer things that they'd been hearing about. So they got in their car and they started chasing it. They went to Olathe, kept chasing it, seeing it in the sky, and finally got over the Olathe Naval Air Station and decided that they were kind of tired. They didn't feel like they could continue to chase it all night, so they turned around and came back. And the next day, they called the authorities and let them know about it. Sent somebody out, and they both have sworn statements about what they saw. But that too was dropped. There's a famous case in New Mexico. It's called the Aztec crash. It's similar to the Roswell alleged crash, where people say that a flying saucer came in and landed in Roswell, and the government came in and spirited away the debris and kept it from everybody for about 30 years. This case also happened in New Mexico. It was in Aztec, but the first official word that we seem to have gotten out of it was out of the Wyandotte County Echo which was repeating a story that was told to it by a local car dealer who had been to Denver and talked to these men in Denver who claimed to have been out and been on the Venusian ship that had crashed and actually had 16 Venusian bodies on board. And I mean, the tale was very elaborate. I go into the great detail in it in my book. Another sighting was in Goodland. A man who was a bombardier in a B-29 they were flying along. They were going from, I think, Denver to Kansas City area. He looked out the window and just happened to spot this giant fan-shaped object that was coming at them at close to about 2,000 miles an hour. It was just over in a second, split second, 2 seconds, he said. But when they got back to the base in Colorado, he gave his explanation. By the way, everybody in the Air Force, if they saw anything, was actually required to file a report. And these reports were kept secret for sometimes 3 years. Some of them still may be secret. 6 other Kansas UFOs were reported by the military that same year. One of the most interesting things I found was probably Kansas's first close encounter of the first kind with an alien. This was a man, he was a radio entertainer in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He was driving on his way to work to the radio station when he came across this strange thing that he saw on the side of the road. It was gigantic and it was just hovering. And he stopped his car and he got out. And he had, one of his legs had been amputated, I think. But he was able to stand up and walk over to the other side of the car. But right as he did that, whoever was in this contraption, it was a disc-shaped object. He described it as 2 platters put one on top of the other. And he said it had propellers or something that were surrounding it. Anyway, suddenly he heard what would sound like a whoosh, the sound that maybe quail make when they get up. And it took off, and then it sped off to the east. He kind of wondered, did I just have a vision? He drove into work. Of course, he's a radio entertainer, so what's he going to do? He tells people about it on the radio. The whole town knows about it suddenly. People are flocking out there. People went out to where the site was and found that the grass had been matted down. Some people were trying to debunk it, but no one ever could. Finally, the Air Force got wind of it about 2 weeks later when one of his friends had sent some grass samples to them and asked them if they could kind of analyze it and maybe give them some kind of an answer. Is this one of ours? Is this one of theirs? Is this from out of this world? So they sent some investigators down and they talked to him. And they talked to all the people that he knew. And they went out to the site with him. They looked around and they still had no answer. In fact, J. Allen Hynek, who was a scientist who the Air Force had hired to actually debunk a lot of these UFOs and explain them away as astronomical anomalies, he actually had no answer for this one. Another one, Plainville, Kansas, middle of the state. 2 pilots who were in a jet trainer. They were flying out of Colorado. I guess they fly out over Kansas and they turn around and go back. Well, they nearly collided with something, some fast-moving UFO. It totally frightened both of them. They came back. They wanted answers, but nobody had any answers. Nothing had been seen on the radar. This one was in Wichita. This is a man who was an aeronautics engineer. He worked then at Boeing. And he and his family were out at night. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning. they wanted to see this new Echo satellite that the United States government had launched. And these Echo satellites were these gigantic balloon-shaped objects, and I think they used them to bounce radio waves off of them. But anyway, it would come over regularly, and so they were looking for it. And then suddenly they see this, they see the Echo satellite. They also see this other thing. It's orange colored, and it's got 3 triangular windows. It looked like it might have been following this Echo satellite. So he went and reported it. They tried to investigate it. They had no answers. And then one of my favorites was this one. 2 college students. They were in the Kansas City area, over by the old Mission North High School, and they were out. They had a convertible. They had the top down. They were driving around on a Saturday or Sunday night, and they see what looks like it might be a plane crashing. So they drive over, and they're just stunned when they drive up, and there's this giant ship. It's about half the size of a football field, they described it, and it's just hovering there. So they drive underneath it. It's not too far above their heads, 100 feet maybe. They couldn't make out a very good shape of it, but they just thought it was round. And when they started getting a little scared, the thing just took off and zipped off into the night sky. They went home, and one of the boys told his mother about it. She contacted somebody she knew at the Air Force Base locally. They said they had actually seen something on the radar. But again, this is another unknown. So when you start looking at some of these, you just wonder if we're being told everything. It's kind of made me question everything that I've learned about in 25 years, 30 years being a reporter, being told that there was nothing to this. But the more I get into the documents, the more I kind of wonder. If you want to, anybody want to make any comments, or I'll open it up for discussion now.
You've indicated there have been other reports since that time. Surely with smartphones and people having cameras, and there'd be more documentation on film than there's been in the past. Have you looked at any of those?
Right now, I have, for purposes of my research, I've been looking at the early Project Blue Book sightings, the 701 cases, but I have no